My introduction and the follow-up post may have left a couple of you wondering, what exactly is she talking about with Black culture and Black storytelling, and how does that relate to allyship, etc.? So here's where the thought came from. Aside from the fact that everything I do is immersed in culture in some way, shape, form, or fashion, I also do realize that, like I said before, while we, meaning Black people, people of color, immigrants, etc., consume a lot of content that is focused around white stories, white people don't do as much. I'm not saying you don't do it all. You don't do as much. So last week I saw that The Help was the #1 movie on Netflix, and I kind of lost my mind. And here's why I lost my mind a little bit. The Help is literally a Disney movie about racism. Quite literally. With the movie, at least, a white woman at the center of the story that's supposed to be a story about these Black maids, right? The book is better than the movie, but even the book is still, let's say the book is a gluten-free, salt-free, dairy-free version of what that story would look like if it actually came from a Black writer. And also the author of The Help got sued by her maid for taking her story, but that's another topic. So to see that in a time of unrest and people wanting to learn that their solution was, let me go watch this feel-good movie about racism in the 60s, was upsetting, right? When there's so much other content on Netflix that you could watch. This is similar, well, it's the same, as the reason why there was uproar about the Greenbook, which people probably thought was a delightful film, when it was so celebrated at the Oscars. The Greenbook was a traveler's guide for Black folks to use as they were driving through the Jim Crow South to find safe places to sleep, to eat in sundown towns, so that they wouldn't find harm, so that they could map out, their drive and know when and where they could stop. And still, here's a movie with a white character at the center. And Black folks are used to this. Movies that are supposed to be our narratives, that are actually like widely appreciated, celebrated, touted, are usually stories about us, but stories about us through a white lens still. So today is about offering you content that is Black stories through a Black lens. Some of it might feel uncomfortable for you to watch. You might feel like you're being intrusive. You're not, but it's also not content that was made with you in mind. And I want you to keep that in mind. There may be inside jokes, remarks, comments you don't understand. You may not know why something's funny, whatever have you, but that's part of the exercise, is for you to view something from a Black perspective. I'm going to probably continue saying this, but today is a starting point. This totally based off my own opinions, what was at the forefront of my mind when I was thinking about this. I have a few suggestions for you in the category of film and TV, and then in the category of books and literature. So with film and TV, there's a straight up feature, and then there's a doc. With books and literature, there's 2 fiction, 2 nonfiction, and then in music, for you to immerse yourself in when you feel comfortable doing so, if you feel comfortable doing so. A starting point, again, and I encourage you to, dig in a little bit more on your own. It may be stuff you haven't watched before, listened to before, read before, because you thought it's not for me. And I know, like I just said, it wasn't necessarily made with you in mind. Doesn't mean it's not for you. It's for all audiences. But again, from a Black perspective. Before we get into TV and film, I first want to advise that these clips have strong language, so please be prepared. But again, part of this is being a little bit uncomfortable, but I didn't want you to get caught off guard with that. And at least one of them has a strong situation. It's hard even for me to watch, but this is not about to be like a grueling exercise, right? So I don't want you to be timid in it. I did just want to warn you that there's some strong language and at least one strong situation ahead. The first movie that I want to look at a little bit, because I'm not just gonna give you a name. We're gonna look at this a little bit. This is how I do what I do. The first movie I want to look at a little bit is Spike Lee's seminal Do the Right Thing, 1989 masterpiece about summer in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. What's important about Do the Right Thing is that was a hugely tense year in New York City for race relations. The exonerated five, formerly known as the Central Park Five, were in the headlines that spring, and then that August there was the killing of a young black man named Yusef Hawkins in the Italian American area of Brooklyn. So this movie was timely then, and it's still timely now.
What? Pino, who's your favorite basketball player?
Magic Johnson.
Who's your favorite movie star?
Eddie Murphy.
Who's your favorite rock star? Prince. You're a Prince fan.
Boss, Bruce.
Prince.
Bruce.
Pino, all you ever talk about is nigga this and nigga that. And all your favorite people are so-called niggas.
It's different. Magic, Eddie, Prince are not niggas. I mean, they're not black. I mean, let me explain myself. They're not really black.
Oh!
Yeah.
You almost knocked me down, man. The word is excuse me.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Not only just knocked me down, but my brand new white Air Jordans that I just bought. And that's all you can say is excuse me.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I'm serious. I'll fuck you up quick 2 times. 2 times. Who told you to step on my sneakers? Who told you to walk on my side of the block? Who told you to be in my neighborhood?
I own this brownstone.
Who told you to buy a brownstone on my block in my neighborhood on my side of the street? Yo, what you want to live in a black neighborhood for anyway, man? Motherfuck gentrification.
Well,
As I understand it, this is a free country. Man can live wherever he wants.
Free country? Man, I should fuck you up for saying that stupid shit.
I checked to see if Do the Right Thing is still streaming on Netflix. It's not. Hopefully, by the time we're done tonight, I can point you to where to find it, but I'm sure a simple Google would do the trick as well. I chose that movie not in spite of it being 21 years old to start, but because it's 21 years old, and with just a few slight updates, that movie could drop this summer and still be just as resonant and just as powerful and just as relevant. And I think that's key to some of what Black people express about our experience, that none of this is new. We didn't make it up. We're not imagining it. A lot of these issues have been the same for decades, and I'm going to point to an even older clip about that later on in the next couple of hours. So now we're going to jump ahead a little bit. The next movie I want to look at, I'm just going to do one clip from, because it's a much more difficult piece of content to watch, regardless of whether you're Black or white. It's actually the first time that I'm revisiting the movie in any way, shape, form, or fashion since I've seen it. This one is based on a true story. It's Michael B. Jordan in Fruitvale Station, which follows Oscar Grant, who was killed in the Fruitvale BART station up to the time of his death, completely from his perspective, as he's playing with his daughter, as he's working, leading right up to that night where they were coming home on a train, got pulled off the train after a fight, and he was shot and killed when the officer said that he thought he drew his taser. Again, it's not an easy piece to watch. It's not an easy movie to watch, but it is the reality of so many young Black men in major metropolitan areas who take transit. And of course, when I say that, I don't necessarily mean that the reality of so many young Black men who take, I mean, even though it is, of so many young Black men who take transit is that they end up dead, although who knows how many it is that we don't know about, to be honest. But in terms of being held for no specific reason, harassed by police officers, threatened with arrest, and or arrested and taken in, there's a whole generation of Black men that could talk to you about stop and frisk here in New York, and there's a whole generation, 2 generations of black men that could talk to you about run-ins with LAPD in LA and then Oakland PD as well. So that's going to be the next thing that we look at, and that's my next suggestion if you are going to delve into cinema to try to educate yourself on what we're currently protesting for and fighting for. I absolutely recommend Fruitvale.
But they can't arrest us, we ain't do shit.
What's that?
I said we ain't do shit, y'all can't fucking arrest us.
Oh yeah? Cuff these 2 assholes, they're going to jail.
But fucking what, you can't arrest him?
How about that?
Get on your knees.
I can't fucking arrest him, we ain't do shit. I'm just trying to get home. No, we ain't trying to go to jail, you feel me? We just trying to get home, we just trying to get home. Be cool,
Well,
man.
maybe you should have thought about that before you started acting like a punk-ass bitch.
Don't call my partner no bitch.
Right?
Bitch ass nigga, for real.
Did you call me a bitch-ass nigga?
Don't fucking say that.
Bitch-ass nigga? Huh?
Hey, fuck that, man. Hey, man, what the fuck is this? Ain't do shit. I can't get his fucking arm. Roll over. Get over here,
So in the interest of time, I'm going to share one more clip with you. This one's a little bit lighter, with a different direction and selection. And we'll talk about a little bit more, and we'll talk about books when we get on live in a few minutes at 7 o'clock Eastern, which I'm still going to do. But this is Aretha Franklin's Amazing Grace live concert documentary. And this is purely about a black cultural experience. Even though the audience was mixed, it was largely black, filmed at a black church in Watts, with Aretha and the Reverend James Cleveland, who is known as the godfather of contemporary gospel. And it's just the blackest church, like the blackest black church experience I've ever seen on film. Here's why that's important. For the most part, obviously, black people are not a monolith, but my point to you is that we all do have certain cultural touchstones that we know and we recognize when we see them. So for the most part, even if you did not grow up in a religious household, even if you didn't go to church every Sunday, there are facets of the black church experience, of black church culture. So like, black church isn't necessarily the same thing as black religion. Black church is about certain protocol and ceremony and rituals and traditions and behaviors and customs that we all recognize when we see them. You guys might have seen the viral clip last maybe 2 weeks ago of the young man who was on the Disney Channel who was preaching about going to school, who was preaching about going to school online.
874, the re592 is unable to connect, so it's telling me Ramon take her ass. Ramon take her ass. You've been working hard and dedicated, day in and day out, day and night. In the midnight hour, you're hurting your eyes by watching the school, trying to get the education, trying to learn knowledge that you might not even use. But that's okay, because I'm required. Can I get a witness if you say I'm required? Yeah, to watch it. I'm gonna reload the page and we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. Let's see, I'm on lesson 105, and it's playing, and it's playing, and it's playing, and it's playing.
So what God telling you to do your work?
And it's playing. No, he's still telling me to take a break. You see how he paused it?
No, you paused it.
I didn't pause
You
nothing.
paused it. You better do your schoolwork.
I didn't pause it. Oh, he just paused it. He just paused it. He just paused it. He just paused it.
I need you to stop putting stuff on God. God didn't pause it. Get over there and do your work.
Mama,
Ramon,
no, I don't want to do the work.
you better do that doggone work.
You know, I don't want to do the work because God is doing the work in me. How am I supposed to be doing work when He's working in me? I need to rest so He has a stable foundation to upgrade on. How, when I'm moving, how am I going to get upgrades? When a car is getting upgraded, it's in a garage and it's standing still.
We all recognized what he was doing. We knew that cadence. We knew the melodic flow that he was using as he was imitating a preacher of a certain sort. So at any rate, as we are preparing to go into our live, I'm going to share a clip before Aretha even comes into the house from Amazing Grace. It's near the beginning, and it's the choir marching in. And the part I want you to take with this is not what they're wearing, because it was the 70s, but their sound and their movement and the call and response of James Cleveland from the pulpit as they march in, as the choir comes forth, as we would say, or as they process. Welcome. I'll be honest, I'm doing this a little bit off the cuff. I kept wondering, like, what are we going to do in the live? And I just said that I would get there when I get there. So here we are. First of all, I want to thank Liz for being so gracious as to turn over her platform to me today. If you are just joining, and if you haven't had a chance to click through the stories and see what I've been talking about and what I posted about already, I'll introduce myself again very quickly. My name is Naima Cochran. I am mostly known right now as a music and culture writer and historian, but for most of my career, I was an entertainment industry executive. I am still an artist manager, in addition to writing about Black music and culture, and also researching and archiving Black music and culture. And there is a framework that, I want to quote her name correctly. Give me a second. I'll find it. But anyway, there's a framework of roles that you can put in process during a social change ecosystem. And one of those roles is storyteller. So as we are facing this current time of change and upheaval, not just with the protests, but even prior to this with COVID-19, when I was trying to figure out what my role looks like in terms of providing help and being impactful and affecting change, I knew that somehow it had something to do with telling the story and disseminating information and helping provide perspective and context. Context is my favorite word. So as Liz and I were speaking about what today could look like for us, and she really left it totally up to me, but I wanted to do something that was also organic to her platform that you guys are used to, and Liz herself is a storyteller and a journalist and a content creator. What I do on Twitter is my primary platform, is really always try to provide some framing. Like Liz said in her introduction of me, I'm born in New York. My parents are from New York. I was raised in South Carolina, and then I've been back in New York my entire adult life. So I have two very different perspectives of how race relations work, of how blatant versus microaggressions show up, blatant racism versus microaggressions. For me, I grew up in the South in a time when the rebel flag was still flying on top of the Capitol building, and I am an alumnus of the University of South Carolina, and we still didn't have MLK Day off, while most of the country did. So, there's that perspective. And also, like, my high school mascot was a Confederate general, and the street that the high school was on was named after him, as was pretty much everything else in the surrounding area. But in New York, it's not that there's less racism, it's just that it manifests in a different way. But ultimately, the thing that is different about New York is that there is such an amalgamation of cultures. And what I find is that sometimes your inherent bias is not even intentional. It's just about ignorance or the reality. And people think that ignorance is a negative word. It just literally means you don't know. And it is just about not having taken a moment to consider another perspective in a genuine way, right? So in terms of art and music and literature, what that looks like is, yeah, we all have different, genres of everything, of media, of music, that is geared towards certain target demos, who the content is made for, meaning made by those writers, creators, from that point of view. But what often happens is that, depending on how niche it is, people outside of that demo may not feel the need to consume it unless it is made palatable for them. So, for example, there's a joke that Blackish is a black show that's made for white people. And that's not really an insult. Kenya Barris puts a whole bunch of little history clips and lessons in there for a reason. For y'all. That's not for us. We know that, most of us. But I do understand sometimes that if you don't feel like it's content for you, you just don't consume it, buy it, watch it. However, on the flip side, everybody who isn't white consumes a massive amount of content that was designed with the white experience in mind, right? I know I've said this a few times already, but it's central to the point. So today, as somebody who considers themselves a protector and someone who preserves Black culture, this was my offering to you, right? How can we bridge gaps? How can we work on our allyship through you guys having a better understanding of the Black experience, and not just the Black experience in terms of us being over-policed, in terms of the education disparity, in terms of glass ceilings at work, in terms of, bias about our hair, in terms of people thinking that we speak too aggressively, in terms of any of those things, right? Not even the Black experience in terms of how the world sees us, but the Black experience in terms of how we see the world, right? Can you speak to how family court affects POC? That is something that is so much deeper than I could possibly get into on Instagram Live, Life Without Warning. Also, I don't really think I'm the person to do that. I haven't personally been through family court. And I think that's actually something we could address, like why you would necessarily assume I had an answer for how family court affects people of color. Like, if I asked you how family court affects your people, would you have an answer? But again, I don't think you meant any offense by it, but I don't have every answer for every Black thing because I'm Black, but I do have a perspective of a certain type. What I shared with you guys so far were a couple of suggestions in film, and I do have some more suggestions that I want to offer in terms of television, for just things that you may have watched before, without really looking at it as an opportunity to learn, right? So for example, again, Do the Right Thing is 21 years old. I'm pretty sure all of you have heard of it. Some of you may even have seen it, but were you watching it as entertainment, or were you watching it as like, this was actually taking from real things that were happening in the streets of New York at that time, and it could almost be a biopic? I think that when you change the framing of how you're watching something, is definitely going to change your perspective of it. And you know, I understand that there are very touchy conversations around what it means for non-Black people to interact with Black culture. And what I'm suggesting to you is miles away from appropriation. Appropriation is actually when you're using elements of Black culture without any context at all of where they came from, how they originated, what they mean to us, how we use them, what their significance is. What I'm actually suggesting is that you learn those things. And one of the ways you can learn those things is through art and entertainment. And also that it could help you, how can I say this? So we're keeping it 100 here, right? Right, exactly. Like the difference between friends and living single. So we're keeping it 100 and very transparent here today, right? So every Black person that you know at work acts a different way when there's no white people around. It doesn't mean completely different. It doesn't mean like there's a mask that comes off, but there is a relaxation, like a letting down of a little bit of a guard, of a little bit of a barrier when we're around what we call folk. And until you actually have seen that, you don't actually know Black people. So again, that is why my suggestion is that you do consume some Black content and actually listen to it for the voice and the perspective, and watch it for the voice and the perspective that it offers. So we talked about Do the Right Thing. Then we talked about Fruitvale, just like Women Do and Men Are Around. I don't know if it's the same as what women do with Men Are Around. There are literally like certain whole things we won't say in certain ways. It's a little too deep to get into here. It's mixed company, right? So, but again, for the sake of transparency, this is part of why I'm suggesting this to you. I'm not so much inviting you guys to assume this culture for your own, as I'm saying, for example, when you go travel, right? If you partake in a ceremony, if you partake in a traditional dinner, go to a church service, my guess is that you observe, you ask questions. So, okay, life without warnings. The question was just to see the depth of how people can be affected in deeper thought than just brutality, systematic broken. I understand that, but what I'm saying, I understand what your question was meant to be. My challenge back to you, my question back to you would be, why did you assume I had an answer for that? That's a real question as well. Why would you assume I don't have an answer for that? Because I don't work in the criminal justice system. So anyway, I'm sorry. So if you were to travel somewhere, and this is just like a very loose analogy, and you're watching traditional ceremonies, you're going to a traditional church service, etc. My hope would be, because I know Americans are terrible guests when we go to other countries, my hope would be that you ask questions. What's this about? What does it mean? Why do you do this? Where does it come from? Why do you do this? I do notice that very oftentimes either you don't see that side of Black family life because the Black people that you know are Black people that you know very casually through work, through school, through flag football, people that you are in passing with, but you're not necessarily spending time with them in their homes and around their family. So I get that, which again is where art can provide some light. But it is okay. I think that some may be afraid to even ask. It's okay to ask respectfully, right? Perfect example. Perfect-ish example. A couple of years ago around Thanksgiving, I read an article that shocked me, and it actually shocked the person that wrote it. And it was about the fact that this woman went to teach at a school, and she was talking to kids about Thanksgiving dinner, and she was asking about what their traditional meals were for Thanksgiving dinner and what goes on their tables, etc. And a black boy said macaroni and cheese, which every black person in the chat right now is like, of course, macaroni and cheese. She was shocked because she didn't understand why macaroni and cheese was so important. I was actually shocked because why would you not understand why macaroni and cheese is important? So I read the article, and it turned out that, at least for a large amount of people, it seems that when non-black people are talking about macaroni and cheese, a lot of them are talking about boxed macaroni and cheese, whereas we're talking about baked macaroni and cheese, unless you're from the South. We're talking about baked macaroni and cheese. So I retweeted the article, and it led to this whole conversation, including the author of the original article, talking about our differences in how we view foods. And like an inherent difference where a lot of people were like, I really could not understand why black people made such a big deal of macaroni and cheese, and us being like, we really couldn't understand how you don't. But it also led to a conversation about, soul food and where it comes from and what the origin of it is. Like, it was a whole thing, but this was a cultural divide. I didn't know there was a macaroni and cheese cultural divide. I had no idea, right? But we had a conversation about it, and it was intelligent and funny and spirited and respectful. And I learned something, other people learned something. It was really dope. And I was also very confused because, I hadn't been aware of macaroni and cheese as a Thanksgiving staple until I moved to the South until college. Right. So some of it is about where you're from regionally, but I was really shocked because I always assumed that the Kraft macaroni and cheese boxes were for kids. I didn't know adults ate that at all. Like, macaroni and cheese is a 5-cheese multi-step baked process that costs a lot of money and a lot of time, and that we don't even let everybody make. Like, you have to earn that. You can't just cook the macaroni and cheese. Like, you have to have macaroni and cheese privileges. So I say that to say, little things like that, we don't learn about each other unless we have these conversations. So the other thing that kind of brought me, it's going to be noisy in the background, I live in Washington Heights, so whatever. So the other thing that kind of brought me to this approach to this conversation is that I grew up in a predominantly white suburb. I went to a predominantly white high school, but I was an honor student. My parents were from New York, and I was often like one of the only black kids in AP class, etc. And somehow I became the de facto black person for white kids to ask about black stuff. And I did not then know enough to know what othering was. And for the most part, even though, they were young, they were pretty, I don't remember ever hearing anything really wild. But one of the things that they used to say to me often, and this is relevant to one of the Do the Right Thing clips I posted, but in a different way, was everybody would ask me, and this is black and white, everybody would ask me, like, what are you? Because I have a certain kind of hair, etc. And I would say I'm black. But I didn't have, like, a heavy Southern accent because my parents were from New York. And they would say, like, no, you're black, but you're not, like, black. Because, like, listen to how you talk. Or look at the references, because, again, I was pop culture. I knew everything. I knew black stuff and the mainstream white stuff. And I didn't really realize at first what that meant. But by the time I got to college and I was in leadership roles, and again, one of the only black people, like maybe on, student government or something like that, I realized that I could actually use this position to my advantage. Like, if they actually felt safe asking me questions respectfully, this was my opportunity to educate. So that might be about something as small as the difference between black people pledging Greek organizations and white people pledging Greek organizations. It's vastly different. It's very, very, very different. As we talk about me moving into entertainment, one of the challenges that a lot of black people face in entertainment is that we're told that we can only work on black projects, whereas people who aren't black can work on anything. So the white boy can work on a rap project, but the black man can't work on a pop project, right? So that's always been very challenging. And the other thing is that the bigger the artist gets, the more likely that the black executive is going to be edged out and someone white and senior is going to take over. And then the third frustrating thing is that sometimes our data is anecdotal, right? So let's say I have an artist for whom I'm the target demo. I can literally raise my hand and say, I'm the target demo. they will still say, well, the data says X, Y, Z. You can't listen to that but so many times. So as a Black person in a business where my culture was being commodified, I fought really hard to kind of protect it and keep it as authentic as I could. And after I left the business full time, that translated into me doing so through storytelling, writing, etc. Would you consider that microaggression? It's 100%. It's not even microaggression. It's just straight up racism, to be honest. It's not. And that's the other thing. Like, racism doesn't just look like somebody's calling me the N-word. Racism doesn't just look like I'm firing you. Racism absolutely looks like I assume that you don't know what you're talking about because you're Black. 100%. Even though you're talking about something Black, I'm going to assume I have no idea what you're talking about. It may be unconscious bias and prejudice and racism, but it's still racist. It is definitely still racist. What I realized is that I wanted to make sure that our stories were told with context, from a proper perspective, and that there was also an opportunity for people to learn from them. So, for example, with music, you may catch on to an artist, hey Lauren, you may catch on to an artist, their second, third album around. Did you go back and listen to their first album? Because the first album is usually the Black album, and then they cross over. And that sounds like a little thing, and it sounds like a very stereotypical thing to me to say. I promise it's true. So if you got on, let's say, John Legend on an album with Green Light on it, did you go back and get lifted and listen to that, right? That Pink is a perfect example. Snicker, did you do that? So those are the kind of things I mean when I say context, because there is a larger framework that you should understand about the evolution of people, including the artists you like, including the athletes you like, including the celebrities that you know, the stories that you're hearing. There are origin stories, right, that you need to know. And in terms of how we are, how we consider things, how we view things, how we think of things, there is actually education that you can do beyond reading Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi, beyond reading The New Jim Crow, and beyond watching 13. Like, all of those things are crucial. They're very important. They're very important to understand how systems work, systems and systematic and systemic racism, how both of those work, how bias works. However, you also just need to know about Black people, how we are at home, how we revere our grandmothers and why, how we act at Sunday dinner, why our church services are so long. Like, and these are the things that I kind of want to offer to you, because that gives you a better understanding in order to actually be an ally and not just, oh, I see your pain, but, oh, I see your humanity, right? Like, I understand why y'all won't eat the potluck food. Like, you may not ever actually understand that, but I'm just saying, these are the things that I am hoping to expose you guys to through entertainment, right? So again, we started with Do the Right Thing, Fruitvale Station, both of which I feel like I brought up because I feel like they are really, really important right now, and to what we are currently protesting, fighting for, defunding police, the over-policing of Black bodies, the lack of actual police community interaction, etc. And then I switched over to Aretha because I also wanted to share for you another side of the Black experience, which is that Black church experience. And I highly encourage you to take a seat and relax and watch the Amazing Grace documentary when you get a chance. Because not only is it Aretha at like her fullest Aretha-ness with her vocals, you also get a chance to see her dad, which explains a lot about her and where she comes from. You get a chance to see her in a church environment, which we just didn't see a whole lot of once she became a star, which is going all the way back to like just the foundation of who Aretha is. And you also get to see a little bit about just how we worship and how we are in church. So I also want to suggest to you on the TV, film, and media side to go back and watch let me see, wait, hold on, I had a question. Are you worried about oversharing, and getting further abused by white creators. I mean, I'm not giving away any secrets here right now. I'm sharing work that's already been created. This is not me inventing new hashtags. This is not me coming up with any new content. This is me asking you to look at content that's already out there in the world for your consumption. I also would love to encourage you to go back to the first season of The Jeffersons. And somebody might say, why The Jeffersons? Even though he is a white creator, Norman Lear is kind of responsible for modern black television. So first with Good Times, just in case you guys didn't know, Good Times was the first sitcom on television that focused around a black family unit. And I want to say the first married black mother and father that we saw on television. And The Jeffersons was the first time we even saw middle-class black people on television, let alone rich black people on television, right? And without The Jeffersons, we don't get to The Cosby Show. So towards the later seasons, it got a little silly and it was just kind of fluff and whatever. But those first 2 seasons were right in the pocket. Like, George Jefferson was saying the N-word on TV every episode, but within context, right? Slamming doors in people's faces. Like, it's such a discussion about, it's such a fish out of water story, but also a discussion about holding on to your roots while simultaneously trying to assimilate to a culture that doesn't, or to a world that doesn't necessarily trust you or understand you, while you in turn don't trust them and understand them. So that is another recommendation from me, is to go back and watch the first season or the first 2 seasons of The Jeffersons, and also maybe the first season of Good Times. Good Times quickly went south though, because they started centering JJ around it. If anybody else in the comments wants to give suggestions while we're talking, and Maud, wants to give suggestions while we're talking, feel free to do so. I'm trying not to bombard you with too much at one time. And I also next want to talk about books and literature, and then I have a homework assignment for you guys when we're done at the end of the night. So there are 2 pieces of nonfiction that I suggest that you read. And the reason being is that again, I'm a storyteller. Both of them are not just data and stats and historical facts. They're full stories. They're stories of actual people and actual families. They almost read like fiction, both of them. The first one is called The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. And it is an incredible, really thorough book about the Great Migration that follows several real-life families who were part of the 6 million Americans. I actually think that number might be low. I'm looking it up right now. Who fled the Jim Crow South to other areas, be it the East, the Midwest, the West Coast, in search of better opportunities and a better life for their families. And the reason this is important is, hold on one second, let me check my number. Yep, 6 million. And the reason this is important is because this is the foundation of all of our family traditions. Every black person you know who lives in New York has family in North or South Carolina. Just about every black person that you know in Chicago has family in like Mississippi. That's because those were the lines the train lines ran for during the Great Migration. And it's also the story of redlining, is the story of how we ended up, with certain neighborhoods that were just ours. It is a story of, white collar and blue collar, working class and middle class living next door to each other at one point in time because they literally couldn't live anywhere else. And it's also a story of the traditions that we brought with us. It definitely suggests to you, why we have certain regional foods, regional musical sounds. Like, there's so much that's wrapped up in this. So me personally, my family story is a great migration story. Both my grandparents are from the South, and on both sides of the family, as soon as everybody graduated from college, they moved to New York. And my aunt had an apartment on 158th Street, where Aunt Janie, where everybody would come and crash until they got a job and got on their feet. I knew that like half my family was in South Carolina, half my family was in New York. And sometimes like my New York family would be in South Carolina, and sometimes my South Carolina family would be in New York. I did not really realize what it all meant. But that is exactly what it is. All my grandmother's brothers and sisters were here already. My grandfather's cousins were up here already. This is what everybody did. They left South Carolina and came up here. So I highly encourage you to read that. It's, even if you're a black person in this chat right now and you haven't read it, I encourage you to read it too. It might be the single most recommended book that I recommend to people. It's that good. And it reads like fiction. It is fascinating and compelling and really well done. The second book I will suggest to you is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. It totally reads like fiction. It is about a black woman named Henrietta Lacks who had cervical cancer, who, unbeknownst to her, before her death, there was cell tissue taken from her. That cell tissue became the HeLa cell, which is the single most used, replicating. So I'm going to speak in layman's terms. The single most replicated cell tissue in modern science. Without her cells, we would not have polio cures and certain cancer research, and it literally has had the single biggest contribution to modern science and medicine. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that. The book says that, the reviews say that, everything says that. It's true. But she had no idea that they took it. Her kids found out about it when they were grown. Her kids who were traumatized by the loss of their mom. And this is the story of this woman, Rebecca Skloot, who was trying to write, the story is actually about her writing the story. The book is about her writing the book. And how hard it was to get Henrietta's kids to trust her. And how hard it was for her to get Henrietta's kids, who are now adults, to understand what this meant, what the HeLa cell meant, what it meant that there was a part of their mother's genetic material of a sort in so many bodies with so many people. And the reason this book is important to understand the Black experience is that it will explain a little bit to you about why Black people, especially older Black people, inherently do not trust institutions and do not trust doctors. So I suggest you read that as well. And it's also just a really, and also to show you, and it hasn't changed that much today, how disregarded Black bodies, Black women were in terms of medical care and treatment. People just really didn't care. And even now, I just read or heard a stat that 50% of med students and interns even now think that we don't feel pain the same way, we have a thicker skin or something. These are people who are actually about to practice medicine right now. So yes, as you are hearing a lot of people talk about, raise their voices about the way that doctors disregard Black patients and Black women especially, this book is a great place to start. So those are my non-fiction suggestions. My fiction suggestions to you, one of them is Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God. This is considered one of the greatest African-American feminist texts, and Zora, one of the great African-American feminist writers. But the reason I'm actually recommending it to you is because it's about the various dimensions of Black love and relationships. We are following the story of a woman who is initially married off at 16 at her parents' insistence for money, and then falls into a marriage of obligation and duty, and then finally actually falls in love. And what that looks like and how that impacts her life and everything that's going on around her during all of that, right? So if you haven't made it your business to watch Black love stories, read Black love stories, let's start with that. Okay, the last book that I wanted to suggest to you, and I'll be honest, this one is a heavier read, so you might want to save this one for a time when you can really focus on it, is Ralph Ellison's The Invisible Man. And this is a tale, to give a very, very brief summation. In short, it is it follows a black man through his life, but what's unique about this is that he is so unseen, he is so disregarded that Ellison doesn't even give him a name. We just know him as the Invisible Man throughout the entire book. So this is uniquely about the black man's experience, written in the 50s. And again, like I said, this one is not a breezy read. So I would definitely suggest that you read it when there's a time when you can wrap your mind around it. So the last set of content that I have for you when we get off live is going to be some music suggestions. I'm going to drop a playlist when we're actually finished with this day and before I hand things back over to Liz, but it's going to be a playlist, and this is something she and I talked about together. I'm calling it Black Storytelling Through Music. So it's a combination of just really black songs, either sonically. You might say, what does that mean for a song to sound black sonically? I can't explain it. I just know it when I hear it. Or in terms of lyrical content, or in terms of subject, or in terms of artist. And it's one that, again, I encourage you to listen to and enjoy, but I also encourage you to listen to song by song and almost academically in terms of what the song is and what it says or how it makes you feel, what it sounds like to you, even maybe do a little research on the artist if you get a chance. So I'm gonna take a couple of minutes and read through comments for any questions, any additional comments. I've been trying to keep up with everything, but it's been hard. Anybody have anything they want to share, want to add, want to ask that's not about the court system? What did I think about If Beale Street Could Talk? I thought If Beale Street Could Talk was heartbreakingly beautiful. My only qualification around watching If Beale Street Could Talk, before you watch something with some, I would say I would love for you to watch a black love story with joy in it first. That's all I'm going to say about that, because it's heartbreaking, literally. But it is also important, I think, to watch from an educational experience for just that reason, because it is about a woman where the man that she loved, the father of her child, got railroaded into a jail sentence for something that he didn't do. And that actually is the reality for far too many people, unfortunately, over the course of decades and decades and decades. And she really was working, she and her family were working to try to, get him cleared, to no avail. So it is a story of love and of loss for circumstances beyond control. And it's gorgeous, but it's heartbreaking. But that's very realistic. It's a lot today. It is a lot today. And you know what? I'm going to put the recommendations that I talked about on a page on my website, NaimaCochran.com. When we're done with everything today, you should be able to find it probably by tomorrow. So, because I know I gave you guys a lot of notes to take, but I also will leave you all with some references. How does this transfer to a marathon as opposed to a quick run? That's a very good question. So today is a beginning. Last week was also a beginning. There are beginnings of different kinds. So I do want to take this moment to say, even though we've been talking about a very specific type of education and allyship, that, I think I mentioned this in response to someone else's question on the static post. What you guys may not know is that whether you knew it or not, believe it or not, were aware of it or not, the level at which you all have had to process race and racism and racial interactions and dynamics and what it means and how it impacts your life and your decision to go outside and go into a certain area, that's us all day, every day. All day, every day. And we talk about it with each other all day, every day. So we're always processing this, right? It's exhausting for us. So if you are relatively new to having to process race and race relations and interactions and allyship on this level, it could wear you out very quickly. So one of the first things I would say is that, like today, I didn't want to give you guys too much. I didn't want to give you like whole listicles of stuff to get into, because there's a lot to consume, there's a lot to learn, there are a lot of conversations to have. You do not have to have all of them at the same time. You don't have to have all of them at the same time. You don't have to read everything at the same time. You don't have to watch everything at the same time. You don't have to have an essay ready to turn into anybody, by the end of the month. Trust me, the black people in your life and the black people that you don't know would much prefer that your allyship be small, sustainable actions rather than a concentrated time period of really big actions, and then you're burnt out and you can't do it anymore. Movements take time. Change, sustainable change, takes time. And even when we're talking about the relationships between us and the interactions between us, there are a lot of things to unlearn as well as things to learn, right? So I recognize there's unlearning that has to happen as well as new learning that has to happen. It's not so much that I expect it all to happen at once. I think we're all on different levels, learning new things socially, unlearning things socially. I'm doing it with ableism. I'm doing it with sex and gender in terms of educating myself and learning what's appropriate to say and not to say, and getting rid of old habits, right? But it does take some time, and it requires dialogue, and it requires honest dialogue. But it also requires like serious questions that like are actually going to, an answer of which is actually going to lead to something. So like, for example, the same person who asked me earlier about the court system, just asked me what the difference is between black feminism and white feminism. That's not a conversation that I'm here to have today, because even though there is a conversation about it that needs to be had, there's not a conversation I can have with you guys on Instagram Live. It's just not. That's a much bigger topic. And that's the other thing you might want to realize, that there are some conversations you can't have on the internet. Like, you just can't. It's not designed for it, or at least not on social media. It's not designed for it. There's no nuance here. It's something's gonna get lost in communication. So please, give things the weight and the time and the space that they deserve when it is about having a real conversation. And understand, and like, as I would say, I speak for Naima, right? I cannot say I speak for all black people. We're not a monolith. If I know that you're making an effort, if I know that your questions come from a sincere place, I'm good with your progress happening at a certain pace, right? If I see actual effort to learn, to unlearn, to educate, to adjust, etc. But again, there's a lot here to unpack all the way around, from policy and procedure and systems to culture, as we're talking about right now, to perception, to microaggressions, to flat out racism. Like, there is a lot. And I just encourage you guys to stay the course. I encourage you guys to also take your own rest, right? We appreciate you taking up our labor. Like, I appreciate Liz for wanting today to be labor free. Like, I didn't have to answer no questions. I was told I could turn the comments off if I wanted to, because today was not supposed to be about labor for me. It was supposed to be a listening exercise. But this is what I do. I share and I teach. So this for me was the best way I could bring myself to this moment and this day. So yes, Snicker, thank you for addressing that, because this isn't the Black Lives Matter Festival. This isn't Black Lives Matter Month. This is a movement. Movements take time. Change takes time. We have a lot to undo. And we have a lot to combat. How do you politely tell this is a great question. How do you politely tell your good white friends that you are not their POC to answer to while they're finding their newfound love for learning about becoming an anti-racist? That was such a good question. I knocked over my water bottle. You just tell them. and their feelings might be hurt, but that's okay. Honestly, if they are genuinely interested in your perspective and in you understanding that they're doing work for themselves, then they won't be offended when you tell them that actually they don't actually have to report to you as their person of color to come to. Someone also asked me earlier how to, and I think this follows along the same guidelines, how do you help your friends, your Black friends right now who are, struggling with stress and mental health, the strain and the intensity of everything that's going on. And the reality is it's a lot, but it's been a lot. It's been a lot. It's just a lot of a lot. And for us, or at least for me, and I know this is the case with my friends, there may be some people who feel differently. I much prefer a simple, if you need something, I'm here, a statement of support than a question of how to support. Does that make sense? Because if you ask a question of me in terms of what you can do for me, you are putting onus back on me to come up with something to tell you to do. If you just say to me, I am here, if you need something, let me know, that's different. I can go to you later. I would also caution you, this was a listening session today. In terms of your friends needing an ear to unburden themselves, I would just advise caution in how you approach that with them. I can understand that you want to let them know that you're available to hear their perspective, that you want to hear their point of view, that you want to hear how they're feeling, that you want them to feel like you're available to them, but you are also asking them to be very vulnerable to you if you're asking them to talk about their feelings right now. So I would first check in with yourself and ask yourself, do you deserve that level of vulnerability from them? Because what they're probably thinking is, if you ain't asked me before now, don't ask me now. And that's just me being frank. And I'm sure they know you mean well, but it is crucial at this time that you consider all the ways in which your outreach might actually center you, right? And in terms of how you reach out to them, you can literally say to them, I'm not sure what to say to you right now. I just wanted to let you know I'm here. That's it. But they would love to see action from you, I think, and not just a simple posting of a meme per se, but something that is actionable. I'm sure they would love to see a certain level of advocacy from you. And the most important thing, I think, is that showing up for them now is cool. Checking in with them now is cool. And if there is a Black person in your life who you genuinely do call a friend, if there is someone who you manage, if there is someone who you work closely with, if there is someone you interact closely with, I would hope that you've checked up on them by now. If there is a Black person in your life who you are a casual acquaintance of, and you haven't texted them for anything in quite some time, please don't text them now. Don't text the random dude at work that you only play on softball league with. Don't do that. They don't really care to hear from you. Hi, mommy. My mom's here. They don't really care about hearing from you. They don't right now. But what's more important is, what are you doing a month from now? What are you doing 2 months from now? What are you doing next year? Think about long term. Think about your allyship, not just to them as individuals, but what does it really mean for your work towards the advocacy of Black and brown people moving forward. This is not everybody. I'll be honest. I'm a person who would actually welcome hearing from someone who just really got skin in the game for whatever reason, who maybe didn't really realize how real it was before. I would be interested in knowing what changed your mind. I would be interested in knowing what's different this time. That's me, though. I don't advise you to just assume everybody wants to know that, because they may not. That would be interesting for me, though. Like, what's different? This must be a lot of work for you. You know what? It's not that much work for me. I mean, it's work. Be clear, it's work. But I came here with that spirit and with that energy. Yes, and checking the other. Thank you, Sharice. And checking the other people who are your friends who are not ready to change. The day of we don't discuss politics at the dinner table, that day is over. That's a wrap. The day of that's just how they are, that's a wrap. The day of, oh, they didn't really mean it, that's a wrap. And it is, I know we say a lot, get comfortable having uncomfortable conversations, but I have found that even in the case of Black Lives Matter and protests, or even in calling out racism, the thing that people don't like is that it makes everybody uncomfortable, right? So it has been shown that comfort is more important to everyone than actual justice. Justice is supposed to be uncomfortable. It's supposed to be disruptive because it's supposed to change things. And if you're comfortable, you're not going to change anything, right? So yeah, it's time to call that uncle out. It's time to call that friend out. It may end your friendship. You got to really think about that. You got to examine that, because I will tell you this, even if the Black people in your life don't necessarily need to hear from you right now, they're going to be watching you moving forward. Because one thing that is different for us is where we have sometimes been like, we have on our side, sometimes been like, that's just how this coworker is. I'm going to go along to get along and keep the peace. That's a wrap too. So, you know, this is a change for real. I've been disappointed how some educators I work with are nervous to have conversations about racism. Educators, we need y'all to get it popping, please. That is one area in which we need to have real conversations. Educators, healthcare workers, y'all who get it, please help these other people get it, please, because these are where our systems of repetition and continual, continuing systematic issues lie. We really, really need people to be unafraid, to have those conversations right now, to make a stand, to do what you got to do on your own, to really speak up and be a voice, even if your coworkers are like kind of annoyed at you. A few years ago, before, and this is the last thing I'm going to say before I wrap up because it's 8 o'clock and technically I'm supposed to be done. But a few years ago, before Ferguson, people would always say, oh, if the civil rights movement happened now, I would do a blah, 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 blah. If I was alive during the civil rights movement, I would have done blah, blah, blah. This is a civil rights movement. Please understand. You are in a civil rights movement right now. Not a kind of, not this is sort of. This is a civil rights movement. It is 100%. So whatever you thought you were gonna do, this is the time for you to do it. All right, guys, I am signing off. There will be one more post from me tonight, and then tomorrow I'll recap some of all the stuff that I went over on NaimaCochran.com. So I thank you guys again for having me. I hope this has been enjoyable for you and helpful for you. I hope that it's giving you some inspiration for some conversations that you can take with you. I hope that it's giving you some inspiration from some ways in which you can take this and keep it moving with people that you know, and again, amplify voices, amplify stories and perspectives that aren't your own, and not just the data about oppression and discrimination, but also the data about who they are and where they come from and what their lives are about. We need to create a full story, right? And that's what I'm advocating for today. So I'm very thankful to you guys. And again, like I said, I will be still checking any questions that you guys have under the last Instagram post for a little while. Thank you. Take care and eat something delicious. You know what? Amen. That's all. You ain't got to tell me twice. That's a blessing right there. Eat something delicious. I love that. Thank you. That's the best thing anybody can say to me. So thank you guys. Good night. One more post coming, but thank you for having me. All right. Good night.